You're listening to Big World Network.
Subprimeval, Episode 5, Where the Homeless Won't Go, Part 2. Written by Robert S.C. Cutler. Read by Ryan Jones. Warning: although there is no material subject matter within that couldn't be found in any general bookstore with no age constraint, this series is rated 18 and contains adult situations and content. Gator waited on the wrong side of the crime scene tape, his crime scene, with a crowd of eager onlookers. He felt his chances of advancement dwindling the closer the day edged toward the end of his shift. After he had called in the body, he was barraged with a line of questioning that at one point made him feel like a suspect. He was then pushed aside by his more senior and experienced fellow officers when his usefulness had run out. More than 2 hours into the crime scene investigation, a patrol car pulled up with Army jackets sitting handcuffed in the back seat. Gator was asked over to the car to identify the homeless man as the same he had spoken with earlier in the day. Army jacket stared angrily at Gator, as if the unkempt officer had betrayed his trust. Gator swallowed hard and nodded. The car sped out of sight, and Gator's heart sank. Driving home down Ridge Road, Gator thought about his unusual day and the break he had been given from the confines of the records vault. Wanting to delay his arrival, he sunk to the right lane, following a slow-moving construction truck. Gator had mixed feelings about telling his wife about his day. He wanted to be honest with her, and it had been his work that led to finding that body, but he didn't want to look like a loser once again for being brushed aside, and he also wanted to shield her from the horrific nature of the discovery. Claire was in the cramped kitchen of their small apartment, pouring 4 glasses of iced tea when Gator walked through the door. Back in high school, she'd been looked upon as homely and geeky, but when she met Gator with her usual sparkling smile, his heart melted like always. Gator had been in love with Claire, her strawberry blonde hair and her beautiful freckled face, since their sophomore year. He was too embarrassed to even talk to her until they were paired up in 12th grade chemistry, where she helped him limp through their year with a C. As senior prom approached, Gator worked up the courage to ask Claire out, and the two of them had been inseparable ever since. 4 glasses? Gator asked. Are we having guests tonight? Duh, silly. My parents are coming, remember? Gator slapped a hand on his forehead. Oh, I completely forgot. Heavy footsteps and grumbling voices sent a sharp pain into Gator's stomach. Jean and Abby Mercer, Claire's parents, had arrived. He dreaded their visits and heavy-handed ways. Claire regressed from 25 to 7 years of age whenever her father was around. He disliked Gator, and Gator disliked him right back. Although he was close to the front door when they knocked, Gator took off into the bedroom and shut the door behind him. "Where did you go, Clem?" asked Claire. "My parents are at the door." "Changing my clothes," Gator yelled from the other side of the door. Gator paused and listened to their interaction as Claire opened the front door. If he didn't want to upset his wife, he knew he would have to put on a fake smile for the nasty couple and play the time-honored lie of, like the in-laws. He changed out of his uniform and put on a pair of shorts and a faded University of Indiana t-shirt, and then walked out into his own private hell. "He's not dressed for dinner," Abby said. "Sorry, Mama," Claire said, and smiled at Gator. "We're going out to dinner, sweetie. Why don't you put on a nice pair of pants and that polo shirt I gave you for your birthday?" Without a word, Gator walked back into the bedroom and sat on the bed. He thought about faking ill, knowing he would have to suffer through a night full of why he and Claire should move back to Indiana from his father-in-law, and the everyday goings-on by his mother-in-law about her secretary job at the Baptist church. "Clueless as ever, I see," Jean said. Claire shook her head. "Please don't start, Daddy." Abby cleared her throat. "Remember, you promised, Jean." Gator loved Claire and didn't want to let her down, so he did as requested and changed his clothes, then re-emerged from the bedroom. A stilted conversation and an iced tea later, the 4 headed out the door for dinner. The next morning, Gator awoke with a headache and a feeling of dread. He should have been excited about working in the field instead of that stuffy basement, but after his encounter with the homeless and his find in the river, he just felt plain sick. He picked out the most wrinkle-free uniform in his closet and set out for work. Claire had walked out the door a half-hour earlier. The insurance company she worked for was conducting a self-audit, which meant a 12-hour workday for both Claire and her coworkers. Leery of returning to the park on Douglas, Gator chose to pursue the walking paths along the Arkansas River. The scenic area between downtown Wichita and the Delano district was void of any activity with the exception of a few geese and an occasional jogger. Just like Riverside Park, there were no homeless people hanging about. About to give up and grab some coffee, Gator spotted a lone individual sitting beneath a tree on the grassy west bank of the river. A woman in her mid-30s was hunched over and rocking slowly back and forth. Her long, dark hair was a rat's nest, sticking out in all directions. She was wearing khaki capris, with rips up her thighs and a filthy white t-shirt with the logo of a local hardware store printed across the chest. Gritting her teeth and mumbling obscenities, she stared off into the river. Gator approached the woman and offered his best professional greeting. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Officer Davis. Would you mind if I asked you a few short questions? It will only take—" The woman cried out in a shrill, mournful tone, startling Gator and causing him to step back. She wrapped her arms tight across her body and rocked even faster than before. Shaken by the bizarre display, Gator took a moment before proceeding any further. He was about to speak again when he noticed dried blood on the woman's right arm and a dark red stain on the side of her shirt. Several deep and festering puncture wounds were visible from the woman's elbow down to her wrist. Gator moved in closer. "Ma'am, would you like me to call an ambulance?" She locked gazes with Gator. Her eyes were wild and dilated, yellowed by jaundice. She screamed, causing him to backpedal and lose his footing. He landed on his backside in the wet grass and mud, ruining his best pair of uniform pants. The woman returned back to her rocking and mumbling. Afraid to proceed any further, Gator called for an ambulance and backup. He was starting to miss the records vault and the safety of his fantasy novels. The police backup arrived 20 minutes after the paramedics, which charged Gator with the duty of helping to restrain the violent patient. The deranged woman ripped both Gator's and one of the paramedics' shirts and gouged Gator's neck. His uniform was now a complete loss. Sergeant Pope strolled up to the scene just as the woman was being placed into the back of the ambulance. He looked over Gator, laughed, and shook his head. "You don't have a single uniform hanging in your closet that isn't a wreck, do you?" Gator looked himself over, putting his hand through a large hole in his shirt. "That woman was pretty wild. The paramedics were convinced she was high on something." Pope placed a hand on Gator's shoulder and turned him to get a better look at his freshly bandaged wound. "How bad is it?" "Stings a little. They dressed it pretty good." "Well, that bitch is going to be in jail for quite some time. She should have known better than to assault a police officer," Pope said. "I don't think she knew what she was doing, and just the same, she won't be able to spend any more leisurely days by the river for a long while. Go home and take a shower. Afterward, buy yourself some new uniforms and bring in a copy of the receipt. You're being put on notice for dress code violation." Pope walked away from Gator and then turned back around. "Also, the lieutenant wants you in civilian clothes while you canvass our homeless population. They might be more cooperative when you start asking questions. Oh, and take the rest of the day off. You earned it." Near the end of his shift, Gator showed up at the precinct wearing khakis and a polo shirt with the University of Indiana logo above the left pocket, along with a copy of the receipt, showing he had charged over $200 to his credit card for new uniforms. At first, Pope didn't recognize him and then blurted out a laugh. "Look at Mr. GQ! You clean up good, Gator," Pope said. "And why in God's name are you here? I gave you the rest of the day off." Gator held up the pink receipt from the uniform store. "Paperwork. Wasn't sure if I was going to make it in here tomorrow." Pope took the receipt from Gator and threw it on a stack of mess on his desk. "You might have stumbled onto something, Gator. You know that woman you found this morning? Well, she claims that she witnessed her friend being attacked and dragged into the river last night by some kind of wild animal, just like that other homeless bum did. They're searching the West Bank area between Douglas and Lincoln for a body right now." Gator beamed. As horrific of a tragedy as the deaths might be, he was thrilled for being acknowledged and praised by his supervisor. "What kind of animal do they think it is?" Pope shrugged his shoulders. "Some kind of crocodile or alligator, maybe." Hear that, Gator? Sounds like your family might be in town, a young desk officer said, drawing a scowl from Pope. The desk officer continued. You know the description of the attacking animal that both those homeless people gave? It's just like the description those deranged parents gave, the ones who killed their little boy. Still haven't found the baby. Pope scowled at the desk officer one more time. Why, thank you, conversation interruptist. I don't believe I was speaking to you. The desk officer's face turned red, and he sank into his seat, returning to his computer monitor. We have a team stalking about both the park and the riverbank tonight to see if they can spot anything. Come by in the AM before you hit the street so I can fill you in, Pope said to Gator. Gator couldn't contain his smile. Really? Your hard work paid off, Officer Davis. Now go home, and that is an order. Gator stood at attention and saluted Sergeant Pope, causing him to roll his eyes at the desk officer to laugh. Gator was so elated about contributing to something big that it felt as if he were floating out of the precinct and into his car. He whistled and smiled all the way home and didn't even care when he saw his in-laws' car parked in front of the apartment building. The conversation was awkward and fake without Claire. Gator listened to Jean and Abby drone on about the finer points of Indiana and how well suited it was to raise a family there. He finally chimed in when Jean brought up a job offer his nephew had made. I'm a police officer. Why would I want to work at an auto parts store? Jean grunted. A real police officer doesn't file papers all day long. That's a secretary's job. Gator agreed with his father-in-law, but only in his head. I'm actually on special assignment. He straightened his shoulders and attempted to look impressive. There's an ongoing investigation that I'm a big part of. How nice for you, Abby said. Claire must be very proud. Gator nodded and looked over at the microwave clock for the umpteenth time since he had arrived home. It was just about 7 and hopefully Claire would be strolling through the front door at any time. Oh, I almost forgot, Abby announced. A good friend of mine has a job waiting for Claire, too. Now, cleaning houses is not the nicest of jobs, but she can make a little money while she goes to school. Gator couldn't believe what was coming out of this woman's mouth. These people were relentless in their pursuit to control their daughters and his lives. I'm going to call Claire to see if she's on her way. Before Gator could scroll down to Claire's name on his phone, she walked through the door with a sack full of deli sandwiches. Sorry I had to work late. I brought home dinner. I thought we were going out to eat, Abby said. You were going to take us to the older part of town. You mean Old Town, Mama, Claire said, walking over to Gator and inspecting his bandage. We can do that tomorrow night. I'm just too tired to go anywhere else but bed. What's this? Gator was at his saturation point with the in-laws and made a plan of escape. Just a scratch. I have to go somewhere after we eat. It's kind of like field work. Work? Claire asked. I won't be gone too long, maybe 10. Are they paying you overtime? Claire asked with a big smile. Well, they should be, Jean chimed in. It would be against the law if they didn't, but of course you would know all about the law, Clem. Gator hesitated. It's just training, so no, I'm not getting paid, he said to Claire. His heart filled with guilt for lying to his wife. He just couldn't stand another minute with her parents. Besides, he wanted to see what type of animal was swimming in the river and attacking people. His bets were on an alligator or crocodile. Later, with his stomach full of a foot-long sandwich, Gator drove away from the apartment and over to Riverside Park. The weather was pleasant for early fall. He rolled down the driver's side window and enjoyed the solitude. He thought about his in-laws leaving on Sunday and smiled. The sun had just gone down, giving the park an ominous feel. He pulled into the lot closest to the animal enclosures and scanned the area. He was exhausted, but wanted to at least get a lay of the land before he called it a night. Down by the river, he spotted a Wichita Police Department animal control SUV and 2 officers making such a racket that a deaf animal would stay away. He watched their antics a little while longer, but soon felt his eyelids drooping. He struggled to stay awake, to at least see if the officers found anything, or if he could overhear their conversation, but before he knew it, he nodded off to sleep. When Gator awoke, the SUV was gone. He picked up his phone and pushed the button, lighting up the screen. 11:30? Holy buckets, Claire is going to give me a good scolding. In the rearview mirror, Gator caught a glimpse of someone walking across the street. He cleared off the fogged-up passenger window to get a better look. The person was headed toward the water, just upriver from the bridge. It was the homeless man that had led Gator to the body. He was unmistakable in his green army fatigue jacket. They let him out? Gator whispered to himself. He grabbed his flashlight and got out of his car. He followed the homeless man until he could no longer hide himself amongst the trees. Gator kneeled and took a ready position. Army Jacket sat down at the river's edge. He wiped tears from his eyes and tugged hard at his jacket. "James," Army Jacket sobbed, "I'm so sorry." A soft cooing being carried along the gentle breeze caused Army Jacket to pause. He sat motionless until a second and third call reverberated all around him. Gator heard the strange sounds too. Growing up along the Wabash River, he had heard a number of different animal calls, but none like this. Army Jacket stood up. A rustling in the bushes and stirring in the water made him jump. He looked all around, scanning both the water and trees for the source of the sounds. A low growl made him freeze. Chirping followed by more cooing filled the night air. He started to back up and tripped over the exposed roots of a tree. He crashed to the ground. Several dark figures scurried about. The strange calls intensified. Army Jacket got up to run, but something was on him in a flash. He hit the ground again with a thud. He pleaded for help, begged for mercy. Then, with an unsettling crunching, his cries gurgled into silence. Gator felt paralyzed by fear. His heart was racing. With his face and glasses covered in sweat, he fought to clear his vision. All he could see was the dark outline of the homeless man and some thing. He fumbled for his flashlight and shone the shaking beam in their direction. A pair of reflective eyes shone back. Gator tried to scream, but nothing came out. Illuminated by the trembling beam, the figure dragged Army Jacket's body by his head into the river and disappeared beneath the surface with barely a ripple. Running on full adrenaline, Gator made it back to his car and drove as fast and as far away from the river and the park as his little Honda could take him.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.